Welcome to We and Lewis, a podcast dedicated to celebrating the remarkable, creative, and energetic people who live in Lewis and are helping our community forge a collective soul as appealing as it is unique. These are their stories in their words. They are the We in Lewis. I'm your host, Kevin McGinnis. Today, we're going to do something different. Our recent episode number 38, with guest Jim Semivan, generated an unprecedented response, most of which addressed the same issue. Namely, it would have helped if you had provided some examples of the kind of unidentified anomalous phenomenon that are constantly being referenced. What exactly does that mean? Are you talking about things flying in the air, strange lights appearing, outside or inside a house, maybe actual direct human to another being encounters? It would help if you gave some specifics. We heard you. So I approached Jim about coming back to the podcast and doing just that, sharing some examples of UAPs. Not surprisingly, if you know Jim, he didn't get upset or irritated, as I would have. Instead, he readily agreed. So we are very lucky today to have Jim back with us here at podcast headquarters at the Bar Kindle to share some examples of what he means when he refers to the overwhelming evidence that we humans are not alone here on Earth. Thanks for coming, Jim, and welcome back.
Well, thank you very much. It's really good to be back.
I recognize you are still subject to a variety of confidentiality oaths that accompanied your long career in government. But what can you share without risking a visit from someone with a gun and a badge from one of the alphabet soup agencies?
Well, thank you first for recognizing the fact that I can't really get into anything that's classified, and I won't do that. And I've been careful about that over the years when I speak about this subject. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things I can talk about, particularly the more public and well-known sightings that have occurred, over probably the last 100, 200 years. And they do go back. I mean, they go back to ancient Egypt, believe it or not. I think it was Thutmose III saw a UFO. He and his wife, and described it as many people would describe a UFO today, or UAP if they saw one today. By the way, UFO and UAP I will use interchangeably. UFO is unidentified flying object. UAP is unidentified anomalous phenomena. Or aerial phenomena, but we call them anomalous phenomena because we really don't understand how they're set up. Give you an example real quickly, and I don't want to digress too much, but UFO, unidentified flying object, was the old term. The reason why it really needed to change was the unidentified was fine, but flying, we're not really sure these things actually fly. They don't fly in any way we know. They seem to defy, Western physics or classical physics as we know it. So we decided, okay, we're not really sure they're flying or not flying, but they're transmedium. They're in the air, they're under the sea, they're in space. Let's just call them anomalous, and then objects. We don't really know if they're objects or not. They seem to appear and disappear at will. Sometimes they appear as maybe a plasma ball and then morph into a disc or a boomerang, and even in some cases, entities. And so that's why we call it just a phenomenon, from the ancient Greek term, the unknown, or the occult or the unknown. So I'll just say that up front. So I also, if it's okay with you, Kevin, let me just give a little bit background on what I mean by a UFO sighting or a UAP sighting. There's some common characteristics of sightings, and usually researchers will view these as the most credible. One of them is there's usually multiple witnesses, usually one or many witnesses who witness a craft in the sky. And there's always, or should be sometimes, corroboration by radar or other technical means. So you have that happen in many incidents we'll discuss here in a few minutes. There's visual documentation. Sometimes people take videos or photographs and unusual flight characteristics of what they were seeing. So you have a craft that's maybe hovering maybe near your house or behind your house. It could be hovering there for 20 minutes or 20 seconds, or it just takes off in an instant. And it looks like it's disappearing because it's moving so fast. But very, very unusual flight characteristics, sometimes a zigzag. And then the inability to attribute the sighting. So you know it's a UFO or a UAP when you don't know what it is. I mean, essentially what that's all about. And then you've seen, we would consider, or most researchers would consider, a credible sighting. Now, having said all that, about 95%, at least 95% of all sightings are explainable. You know, usually, I remember when the U-2 spy plane came out, CIA spy plane, and the Oxcart, the other version of it, and the Blackbird with different names. I mean, people were seeing these things shooting across the sky, and they're going incredibly fast. And they would look at them and say, oh, my God, I saw a UFO. Well, it's not really the case. Sometimes there are atmospheric disturbances. Sometimes, you know, planes that maybe the sun is reflecting off them, they look different or odd. So most of these things are explainable, you know, sometimes weather balloons, things along those lines.
The United States Congress had a hearing a year or two ago in which they showed a tape, and this was from the Nimitz. And what was so remarkable about this tape is that they had on the gun cameras, which are highly sophisticated, highly fast, following a blip that looked sort of like a tic-tac on the radar. But it was moving very fast, and then it would hang a right turn, which under the physics of this world, you can't do.
Right.
And so let's talk a little bit about what that showed, because that's been made public. That was an actual real live example in which implicitly the federal government endorsed.
Right. Yeah, that's probably the most famous and well-documented UAP sighting, and probably in the last 20 years. And it happened in 2004. It was the carrier strike group that was leaving, I think, San Diego, and it was the USS Nimitz nuclear aircraft carrier. And with them was the USS Princeton, which was a missile cruiser. But the Princeton was also, you know, decked out with, they had the Spy 1 radar, which is a synthetic aperture phased array radar, which is just a fancy way of saying, instead of those antennas that go around and round and round we used to see on ships, these are more solid state, and they would send out electromagnetic frequencies out in this phased way that they would be able to lock onto an object, for instance. And I mean, sometimes extremely small. It's highly classified to how small they can get, but it's really small, and for miles and miles and miles around. So they're very, very highly sophisticated. And they even have more sophisticated ones now, because that radar was probably, you know, late 90s. But radars last a long time, I should say, and so do sonars and everything like that. So they were having this exercise. They have an E-2 Hawkeye, which is an early warning aircraft flying around the exercise. They have a submarine. I think it was USS Louisville, but I'm not really sure. And the aircraft carrier had a lot of F-18s, fighter jets, a squadron, and the goal was to go out and do exercises, right? And one of the goals was how do you defend, you know, a carrier strike group? So the F-18s would go out and go around. Well, they're out there for a few days, and the Princeton, USS Princeton, is noticing. The radar operators are telling the captain, look, we have some what they call AAVs, these aerial anomalous aerial vehicles, they call them. This is a common naval term when they can't identify something on their radars. And they identified 20 of them initially. And they had been hovering around the strike group for about 3 days, and they had seen these things. So they're preparing for this exercise to begin. So
I'm assuming if you're on a strike force, if you have 20 things you can't identify hovering around your strike force, this is rather like scary. This is validation of all the precautions you're taking.
Yeah.
Because there's something out there and you can't figure out what it is.
That's exactly right. And, this is very serious business.
Right.
So, they didn't seem to be coming, too close. They were stationary. They were very, very high up, usually around 80 or 90,000 feet up. And at the time. So the captain of the Princeton, basically says, look, we've got to check this out. So he sends out 2 F-18s. In the first case, it was Commander Dave Fravor, who I had the pleasure of meeting a while back. And I heard his story firsthand, and then also the story he has told to Congress and other people. But he goes up, and they're trying to see where these things are, and he actually runs into them. They're up there, and this whole incident lasted only like 5 or 7 minutes. So he gets up there, and they see them. They lock onto them. The radar locks onto them, and he visually sees what it is, and it's a white object, 40 to 50 feet in diameter. It has 2 tiny little legs that come down, straight down and then at a right angle. I mean, very, very tiny little legs. And he sees this thing, and they noticed that it went from 80,000 feet to 50 feet above the water in 0.78 seconds. That's how fast this thing was. That's over 40,000 Gs, well over 45. The acceleration is, And to give an example about G forces, if you're in an F-22, right, you can probably do 9 Gs, before you pass out or the aircraft disintegrates. The F-35, which is the newest one, our newest fighter aircraft, can structurally take about 13.5 Gs. But the pilot, for maybe a second or two can do that. But after that, the pilot just, would pass out. So just to give you an example how fast these things were moving. And not only were they moving that fast, they were moving at right angles also. So he sees this thing, and he notices at the same time that it's mirroring his movement. So if he's moving, at 3 o'clock, it shoots over to 9 o'clock. If he's moving at 12 o'clock, he's going straight up. It's going straight down. So it's sort of playing with him. So he decides, he's gonna sort of try to get closer. Now, mind you, the gun camera footage is going. So they have these they call AT flares. It's forward-looking infrared radar, right? Very, very sophisticated. So he's getting all this on infrared, and also on his gun camera footage, he's getting it in sort of real life, the real color and everything like that. But he also notices, he looks down at his wingman and says, look, he said, there's a disturbance on the ocean. So he thinks it might be a submarine, surfacing. So he goes down to look at it, and there is the craft hovering about 50 feet above the water. And it appeared to him, he found out later on it was definitely not a submarine. It was just a major disturbance. They think it might have been like another craft that was underneath the water. So when they went down to investigate, this thing shot up again, and he lost contact with it. And this goes on and on and on. The story about how they were trying to figure out where it was, and if you watch the videos, and you can see the videos if you just go on Google it, USS Nimitz videos 2004. It'll show, I think, 1 or 2 videos that they have, and it's absolutely fascinating. And David said, Commander Fravor said, look, he said, I've never seen anything like this in my life. There's nothing in our arsenal that even comes close to this. The flight characteristics were just incredible. No known propulsion system, seamless. They later found that these things go underwater. They can, shoot up into space, so they're transmedium. And anyway, as they went out, they were coming back to the ship. They were about 60 miles from the ship when this was going on, from the aircraft carrier. the radar, he said, he calls back to the USS Princeton and says, look, we're going to head back. And he said, well, you won't believe where they are. And he goes, what are you talking about? And he goes, they're at the cap point. And if you're a Navy person, you know that the cap point it's called combat air patrol. I mean, that's what they do. And when you coming under attack, a fighter group comes under attack, you defend the fighter group. You go to the cap point. The cap point is highly, highly classified. The only people that know a cap point are the pilots before they take off and the person who tells them where the cap point's going to be. And it's the
So this is a predetermined spot.
Predetermined, and no one knows about it. Radar people don't know. Well, the radar people would know, but nobody else knows because that's the place where you're going to defend the carrier group. And the radar guy tells Commander Fravor, you're not going to believe this, but they're waiting for you at the cap point. So sure enough, they're heading towards the cap point, and there they are.
And how fast are these fighters moving at this time?
Fast. I don't know how fast they weren't going fast enough to break, the sound barrier. They generally don't need to go that fast, but very, very fast. 600-700 miles an hour, whatever their normal speed is, and they get back to the cap point. But they're at the cap point, and then when they return, they shoot up, 80, 100,000 feet again. So they land. And then another 2 F-18s go out and basically go through the same routine with these things, right? So when I was doing some unofficial consulting for the Pentagon at the time on this particular topic, and I saw the classified pictures and videos. The ones you'll see were cleaned up because the Princeton has something called the Spy 1 radar, which is probably the most advanced radar in the world. And even the stuff on the radars on the F-18s are highly classified. So if you see the original footage, you'll see all the data around it, So the videos you see on like you see on Google were all cleaned up. I mean, they took a lot of that data off of it, so you can't really tell how sophisticated this radar is. But when you see the real radar and you see the gun camera footage, my God, I mean, it's you get gobsmacked because what is this thing? Now, I dealt quite a bit when I was in the agency. I knew quite a bit about what technologies, Russia, China had, what our technologies were. And this was nothing that even came close. These were not an order of magnitude. I'm talking about orders of magnitude more sophisticated than anything we have. And that's what was very, very surprising. And this is what Commander Fravor and others who said when they witnessed these things, they told Congress, look, we've never seen anything like this. It is definitely not from this world. And
again, this is something the United States government, via the Pentagon, has released.
Yes, they released it. I think they got, on second thought, I think they probably wish they hadn't.
But they released this.
Yes.
It's out there, and
yes.
No one has said it's not true. No one has said, oh, that's fake.
Well, there are people that usually these arch skeptics will come out and will say like, oh no, what they were actually witnessing was a flock of birds or something. It's the most ridiculous thing. When you speak to I spoke to 2 of the radar operators that were on the Princeton, and I asked them the obvious questions. Did you reboot the system? Were you looking for anomalies and glitches? Oh yeah, the first thing we did. They said we, shut it down, put it back up again, and boom, there they were. They said it's very, very clear this was real. He said, plus these systems are so sophisticated. There wasn't just one system copying this. There was, 3 or 4 different systems, and they were all coming up with the same thing. So the chances of this being some kind of a anomalous or a computer glitch or software glitch, highly remote, extremely remote, to the point where you just have to shake your head and go, no, okay, this is real.
So that's one example of where the federal government, intentionally or not, or where they're having doubts, released something and provided the validating information.
Interestingly, after this event happened, I think it was 8-10 hours later, Helicopter lands on the Nimitz. 2 guys get out. They call them the suits, right? They get out and they confiscate all the tapes, take everything. And they said, don't mention it. And the radar guy calls the captain and said, are you sure this is okay? And captain said, do whatever the hell they tell you to do. So they got back on, helicopter flew off.
We have the Nimitz example.
Right.
But then, as you have said and others have said, there has been debris.
Yes.
And not just in this country.
No.
So there has been a lot of stories about where the debris is kept and a lot of movies where it suddenly turns on and things of this sort. But there is craft debris at various locations around the world. Is that right?
Yes. As a matter of fact, my company was able to procure a piece of, well, we haven't identified it yet, but it's a piece of magnesium and bismuth, clearly manufactured, and 83 layers of bismuth in between layers of magnesium, and there's some tin and zinc in there. Clearly manufactured. We know from the provenance of it, it was probably from the 40s. We think we were told it came from a UFO crash. We had it analyzed numerous times by laboratories, and they all came back and they all said, this was clearly manufactured, but we can't do it. We don't have the machine tools to manufacture this.
But is the materials in it that were manufactured into a shape, were the materials that were in it that were manufactured in a shape, were those materials that are available here on Earth?
Well, actually, they're available in the universe. I mean, you can have where you get the changes are in the isotopic ratios. So if you
let's pretend I don't know what that means. So
well, an isotope. Let's say you have magnesium that has so many isotopes, and then there's variations. Sometimes it can have more isotopes. Some versions of it, if you put it together with another alloy, the isotopic ratios might change. But there's a limit to how far you can go.
This that you had tested, is that something you've held?
Oh, yeah. I held it in my hand. As a matter of fact, we showed it to the Army Futures Command. They came out to our company headquarters, were fascinated by it. These were highly skilled metallurgists and engineers, and they signed a CRADA with us. And a CRADA is a cooperative research agreement. So they took it for a couple years, and we finally had it tested by Oak Ridge National Laboratory. And they came back and they said, don't know what it is. We don't know what it is. And then we had 2 of our scientists go meet with their scientists. Some of this stuff, their complete report couldn't come out. It was some sensitive information on how they conducted the test that they couldn't discuss publicly, which is understandable. But they did a great job on this. But again, it's still inconclusive. We don't know where it came from. And they said, the materials are earthbound, but what they also mentioned was, look, if this is clearly from the 40s and 50s, and we weren't experimenting with magnesium and bismuth in the 40s and 50s, and we certainly didn't have the capability to create this particular piece. In other words, we had a private company, a defense contractor, was so fascinated by this, we allowed them to cut off a piece, and they tried
to replicate it?
They tried to replicate it, and they couldn't do it. They got to, I think, 1 or 2 layers, spent $1 million, and broke their machine tool. Trying to do it. So there's more. There always in this topic, always more questions than answers. And I will also caution you that if you go into Wikipedia, be very careful. I'm a big fan of Wikipedia. I've always donated to them.
I would just like to note from personal experience, Wikipedia is wrong on some things.
They're wrong.
I will just say that.
Yeah. Well, they've had a big push by these arch skeptics over the last year where they've gone through all these UFO incident sites and basically tried to quote unquote debunk them all. And what it ends up is, and it's just fine. I mean, you go out and, you want to tell the truth. But at the same time, a lot of things are not really mentioned and are not covered up. So there's, in my my view, sins of omission, right? And a lot of these Wikipedia entries. So I don't even bother looking at them anymore because it's just silly, because I know some of the backstory, and, they'll delete it if it sounds too strange, or too crazy for them,
So you have the Nimitz.
Yeah.
You've held materials that were manufactured in a way that was not possible at the time of,
right,
as best you can tell, the time this thing was created. Can you give a good example of the experiences people have had with lights in the sky or lights in the house that are doing very strange things?
Yeah, let's here's one of the most famous incidents. It was I think it was Japan Flight 1628. I think it was in 86. And the captain of the flight is going from Narita. No, I'm sorry, he's flying from Paris to Narita, right, which is the airport in Japan, near Tokyo. And it's this long haul flight. So he's flies out of Paris, and he's going over to northern United States.
He's doing the polar route, sort of?
Yeah, pretty much. And he ends up over eastern Alaska. And he sees, not only him, he has two co-pilots with him, and they see these strange lights, orangish, yellowish lights off, that are following the aircraft. And so they sort of panic, and they don't quite know what these things are, but they've been following it for a long, long time. And they're a decent size, right? So they're orb-like. He called them orb-like. So they get, about 500 miles into Alaska, eastern Alaska, right? And they're flying over. Finally, he starts to panic, and he gets a hold of the air traffic control in Alaska and says, "Hey," he said, "what's going on?" And Alaska air traffic control comes back and says, "Well, we got some things, two of these things on radar, but we can't identify them." And he said, "Well, they don't seem to be problematic. They're following us, but they're not getting too close on them." And they said, "Well, let's keep track of them." And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, 5 miles ahead of aircraft, is this gigantic, what he called a mothership. And it looked like this big round ball with these little, side things coming out of it. And he claimed, well, he didn't claim, he actually had the radar on this. The radar picked it up. It was the size of maybe a football field. And it was right in front of him. And that's when they started to panic. And it was 5 miles. That's way too close to be in front of an aircraft. And so he called air traffic control again, and he said, we're going to have to take evasive measures. We're running right into it. So they dropped 5,000 feet, and they went in, and they went under it. And as they were, I think it was, there was a certain point where the craft then just literally just disappeared in front of them. So here's a guy. He was a Japanese fighter pilot, 10,000 hours, all right, as a fighter pilot, not even getting into how many hours he had, as a captain of a big long haul aircraft. He lands, and he just goes to his superiors, and he sits down and he draws everything out, and he said, this is what happened. And then he gives a press conference, and of course they ground him because of what he did, because he was he scared people. They want them to take Nippon Airways, Japan Airways, and hear your captain seeing crazy things, right? But he was, he had the radar data, and he had his two other flight people on there with him, a co-pilot and another captain was on the flight. They all claimed he was seeing the same thing. So it ended. Chicago, O'Hare International Airport, 2006. A bunch of United Airline people were standing out on tarmac, and all of a sudden it was sort of a semi-cloudy day, right? And they look up, and there's a large disc hovering above the airport, but right over the United terminals. And a dozen employees saw it. United Aircraft employees saw it. And it hovered there for about 2 minutes, and then it shot right through the clouds and left a donut hole shaped through the clouds. And it was gone. Well, the United Airlines people, went nuts. Chicago Tribune comes out and they interviewed everybody, and they said, look, a couple pilots were saying, don't tell me it was an atmospheric event. It was not an atmospheric event. And of course, it later on proved it couldn't have been an atmospheric event.
So I know there's a great book out about a very sort of normal American, very, very religious. And he started seeing things, and he paid a high cost for sharing this information with others. He was ostracized in his community. It would go through all sorts of stuff. And then other members of the community started seeing the same things.
Are you referring to the Chris Bledsoe incident, North Carolina?
Yes.
Chris is a dear friend of mine. Love him to death, and his family. There's great people.
And you wrote the foreword for his book.
Yeah, I wrote the foreword for the book, and he was probably the most investigated incident, and it's in recent UAP history. Here was a guy who lived in Fayetteville, North Carolina, Pentecostal Christian, whole family, long line of Pentecostal Christians in that area, and family very well known. He was a builder of much renown, very successful builder, wealthy. He develops a serious illness, a version of Crohn's disease, and it is basically just killing him. And his business suffers, and he doesn't quite know what to do. He's finishing up a project with a development project, and there's a group of framers that are friends of his, framing houses and stuff. And his young son, Chris Jr., is there with him. And they decide, Chris Sr. goes out and picks him up, and they say, hey, let's just go fishing down Cape Fear River. We have time now. Let's do some, night thing. It was like 4 PM. So they said, yeah, let's do that. But I'll make a long story short. So they go down to the Cape Fear River, and they set up a campsite there. And 3 of them go off fishing. They had, and he says, "That guy, I don't want to fish. I'm gonna walk through the woods," because he's a nature guy, right? He's a hunter, but he loves nature. He's walking through the woods, and he comes to a clearing, and he, like I said, is a very religious man. Really is just being devastated by this illness. He just sends a prayer up, and says, "Look, somebody, just help me. I can't take this anymore." And then all of a sudden, right across the river, these 3 orbs show up over the trees. And he's staring at them, and he's going, "Oh my gosh, what is this?" So he panics because they start moving towards him. So he's running through the woods, and he gets this feeling that he's being followed or chased by this thing. And he sees them. He's looking up, and he sees them coming through the woods. So he crawls, and there's this dirt road that sort of goes up to where the entrance to where they came in. It was a farm area. And he crawls like through a ditch, and he's coming up on the road, and he looks up, and there is a craft 40, 50 feet in diameter, hovering about 100 feet above the road, right? So he sees this, and he goes, "Oh my God." So he takes off, running back through the woods again. And before he knows it, and this is like a missing time experience, it's close to 11 o'clock at night. And he finally makes it back to the campsite, and there's a big bonfire going on, and the 2 of the framers are standing there, and he comes up and he says, "First of all, where's Chris Jr.? Where's my son?" And the framers go, "Where the hell have you been? You've been gone 4 or 5 hours, and Chris went looking for you in the woods, and he hasn't returned, and we're worried about him and worried about you." And then Chris Sr. says, you won't believe there was a UFO. I think we're being invaded. The United States is being invaded. There was a craft. And so they thought he was crazy. So, but he goes chasing off in the woods, trying to find his son. So eventually he finds his son, and his son is cowering behind these trees. And the reason why, because he's being observed by these luminescent beings. They're like white, transparent type beings with big red eyes, right? I know this sounds really odd to people that are listening to this, but if you met Chris and you've talked with his son and the other people that were there, it's you would walk away as believers. And every time Chris Jr. would make a move, they would like move towards him. So when Chris Sr. arrived, they sort of disappear. He grabs his son, takes him back to the campfire. They said the framers are absolutely petrified now, and everybody's petrified. So they jump into the pickup truck, and they're heading up the road, and they get up to this rise in the road and ready to go off, and there's this UFO right above them, once again hovering right above them. They absolutely panic. So they don't know what to do. So they're arguing what they were going to do, and the framers are saying, let's just get us home, get us out of here. So they take them. They decide to go underneath the UFO. So they do that. So they go off, and the thing starts following them. And they're arguing all the way down this road, and they get on the main drag, and they're arguing all the way down this road. Who's going to go home first, right? And the framers are saying, look, we got to protect our families if this is an invasion, and they're watching this thing, right? They're watching this thing following them right down the road. So he drops the framers off. He and his son go back to their house, and the UFO's gone. They get back into their house. And the kid's running through the house, shutting all the blinds and windows and stuff. And Chris Sr. says he goes into his den to close the windows. He looks out, and there is this, 5-6 foot tall being, big red eyes and stuff coming towards the house. So he runs, grabs Chris Jr. They run out to the pickup truck, go in the pickup truck, drive 5 miles down the road, find this cornfield, in the middle of this huge cornfield. They ride their truck right in the middle of this cornfield, and they stay there for the rest of the night. Now, his family has gone visiting relatives, so it's just these two, right? In the morning, they come back, and, they're absolutely petrified. Two things, though, happen. Number one, he doesn't have Crohn's anymore. It's gone, right? Second thing is he and his son are totally traumatized by this, right? They don't know what to do. The family comes back. He explains to the family what happened. The son's so upset, son just leaves. Just takes off. Doesn't come back. Family thinks he's nuts. The church finds out. Church disowns him. Family doesn't know what to do. And it wasn't until later on I played a little bit of a role helping Chris and the family come to terms with it, only because it happened to me and happened to other people. And I was explaining to him, what actually probably occurred. Anyway, there are dozens of more elements of this story. It just doesn't end like that. Anyway, what happened, the family finally comes together. They agree to all this. The wife, Yvonne, is this lovely lady. She basically admits, she had an experience herself too. The kids sort of come around to the family, and they're in really good shape right now. But there were other elements of this. It just got stranger and stranger as it went along. Now where he lives now, orbs come to see him all the time. I mean, they get within 30 feet of him, and he has video of all this. And he always sends me videos and stuff. And so there's a movie being done about it now, a Hollywood movie that's being done about it. His book is doing incredibly well. It's a very well written book. It's called UFOs of God. I recommend it. Because I think if you read it, it'll give you a clearer understanding of, and this is the woo factor. This is what scares everybody. Yeah, everybody can deal with this idea of, extraterrestrial craft or extra dimensional craft visiting, because it's a real thing. You can sort of look at it. You can put your hands on it. But when you get into the more details of what's behind this, then it gets strange. It begins at what we call high strangeness, because there's an absurd element to this that's very, very complex. When you talk to people, particularly people that claim they've been abducted, some of the details of the story are so out of bounds. They sound absolutely insane. They sound like they just came from some, the weirdest LSD hallucination. And yet these people claim that this is real. And, John Mack, Dr. John Mack, Harvard psychiatry, chairman of the Department of Psychiatry at Harvard, wrote 2 books on this. One's called Abduction, the other one's called Passport to the Cosmos, where he interviewed hundreds of these people. And he came to the conclusion at the very end. He said, look, he said, these people are all above average. None of them have any kind of neuroses, and there's nothing wrong with them mentally. Yet they all have similar stories, and they all believe these stories to their core. And he said, and I believe that they believe this, but I can't explain it. And I remember once he said, this is a mystery, and that's about the most we can say about it. He doesn't know what he's like me. I don't know. All I know is it's real, but I don't know the who, what, why behind it. I just don't.
So,
and nobody else does, by the way, that I know of.
But there's a reality that if you go public with an example of an experience like this, it comes at a cost.
Yes.
It's kind of like suggesting that the Earth revolved around the sun in the 1600s in Italy.
Right.
I mean, no one's been burned at the stake, but ostracism, social shunning, governmental attacks, loss of work, that's all very real still. And I think in your story in Chris Bledsoe's, and I believe in Chris Bledsoe's case, he details all of this in his book.
Yeah.
And I know that has a chilling effect on this discussion.
Yeah.
In its entirety, because you're going to pay a price for it.
Yeah, you always do. And although lately I have to admit there are a lot more people coming out, and they're not afraid anymore to say this. And I think that's a very, very good thing. A lot of government people are finally coming out. There was this recent article I read. A NASA flight surgeon, was shown a video of a UAP, and with people around it, and rose up and went down and what have you, and he was shocked by it. And he'll never forget it, because once you see things like this, once you see the pictures or you see the videos or you read the accounts, it changes. It changes your life. It changed mine completely. I mean, it was. I had an experience. I don't know what kind of experience. I don't call it an abduction because I don't know what the hell it was, but it was a very, very real experience. But it left physical marks. Let's put it that way. And I've been studied, and nobody has an answer for me. I don't have an answer. I don't lose sleep over it. It didn't change me in any way. What changed me was sitting down in a classified setting and somebody telling me, people I respect, telling me, well, here's the truth. Here's what we know. And oh, by the way, yeah, this is all real.
Is part of this the simple fact that the government stuff's starting to come out from the government in government forums, if you will. Things are now being said that would have never been said before. We're at a time where we're having a discussion about the nature of man, the nature of being, and what we see that I think used to be reserved for the Nobel Prize house, where all the
Right.
the Einsteins of the world would get together and they could talk about things that the rest of us have no idea what they're discussing. But we're beginning to understand that when I look at you, what I see is not what you are. And fortunately, what you see is not who I am. But this is all becoming real, and we're starting to push the envelope a little here into the realization that many of the laws of physics that we have been taught or understood may not be the ultimate answer here. My point here is, if all of this is going on, and you firmly believe and honestly believe all of this UFO-related stuff is bunk, you might want to keep some part of your brain open to the fact that what we consider to be the truth today is evolving.
What's interesting is, we talked about the Nimitz earlier. This is still going on today. People can recall the New Jersey, drone sightings. Well, most of those were hobbyists. I mean, and people just really taking advantage of the fact that you can fly drones at night. And they were flying over, sensitive bases and stuff. Some of it was spy stuff, I'm sure, Russians, Chinese, Iranians, doing that. But there were, and I've spoken to people just recently, there were some anomalous drones, they were lights, they were orbs. They don't know where the hell that came from. They clearly were not drones. And so how do you explain that? This happens constantly, all the time, and it's constantly going on. The nice thing about it is people are reporting it now, but they're reporting it through classified channels, and that's reasonable to a certain extent, because if you think something's anomalous and then report it through a classified channel and they take the time to look at it and they think, oh my gosh, it's new drone technology that the Russians or Chinese have, then clearly you don't want to talk about that. They were able to penetrate your airspace until you find out, how you can basically take it down. One of the big things when I used to deal with in the agency was, if the military came to you and said, we heard about a technology, can you find out if it's real? And you go, yeah. So you do all the investigation and you do an operation, we would call it an operation, and you come back and you say, yeah, that's real. It's about 10 years ahead of what we have, then you have to determine how you can defeat that, right? And then when you do determine how you can defeat that, then the opposite side then, would have to come back and say, okay, they can defeat that. They always find out, right? And now I have to create something different. So there's this constant back and forth with these things. But what we're dealing with here, it's not a country we can identify, There's not a group of people we can infiltrate. People claim it's an intelligence failure. I mean, I would say, well, what country can we go to? I mean, we don't even know what the technology is. Our best scientists can't explain it to us. They can come close to maybe getting where it might be, how it might work, but they don't know either. So, and I think I might have mentioned this the last time, and we, don't look at, people like me. I mean, I look at this phenomenon itself. It's not announcing it's announcing itself, but not in a way that's really helpful, and it's not showing up and saying, hi, Kevin, can I sit on your podcast and explain to you, who I am and where I'm from? It doesn't do that. It runs the situation. It controls the situation. As a matter of fact, Jacques Vallée used the term as, it really functions as a control mechanism, that it's able to basically take our views of society and psychology and what have you and manipulate them and change them to what it wants us to believe it is, if you will.
Jim, thanks again for joining us today.
Sure.
For sharing some specific examples. Again, as I said before, it's comforting to know that people like you are at the heart of the efforts to understand and explain what's happening with our world. Till next time, from podcast headquarters here at the bar of Kindle Restaurant in the heart of downtown Lewis, this has been, well, at least until we get beamed up, We and Lewis, the podcast.